Peace and blessings, everyone. Today is Tuesday, August the 11th, and we have a dope presentation for you titled Marcus Garvey, Science and African Liberation, and that will get started in a few. Yes. Again, want to welcome you all to the program this evening, and shout out to everyone who is listening live, and then of course all of those who are listening on the archives. And peace to everyone who has made it in the chat, brother Ben out on Facebook, Don Williams, OG Gorilla, Sister Tamika, D. Contavo, and anyone else who will join Paul Ogden. Thank you all for listening live. And especially thank you to the Brothers UK. Thank you for your donation all the way in the United Kingdom. And he gave his donation before the show even started. So thank you very much, for that. It is greatly appreciated. And so, yes, today's topic has to deal with Marcus Garvey, science, and its role, I should say, in African liberation. Now, for those who follow me on this channel, y'all know that when I have a presentation somewhere, usually after like a live conference, I like to come back on my YouTube channel and do the same presentation for those who were not able to attend the conference. So in this stretch, this past weekend, there was a conference put on by Afrocentricity International that was titled the RBG Centennial Conference, in celebration of the 100-year anniversary of the UNIA's first international convention of Negro peoples of the world. And so I guess due to COVID, of course, they initially wanted to celebrate in a live, conference fashion, but due to the COVID, we had to do this online. And so it actually kind of worked out in a very unique way, because more people from across the world were able to participate, in the conference itself. So it was a very dope conference. And the webpage is still up for those who, want to see exactly, who participated. And I know that the conference was recorded, but I don't know if it is up on Afrocentricity International's not website, on their YouTube page. So I don't know if they're going to do that, or if they're going to make a, like a CD or DVD, for sale or whatnot. So in due time. But the conference was this past weekend on August the 8th and the 9th. But prior to that, there was a whole week of online events, ending with a concert on Friday in preparation for the conference itself. So there was a number of, individuals that were involved in terms of the planning committee who did an excellent job, holding it down, making sure everything was organized and making sure that the flow, of the conference was done in right and correct order. And so shout out to Brother Omawali and Sister Tahira, who were the co-chairs, of the event. And then you have Brother Kareem and Sister Wahida, Brother Quadros, Sister Adwa, Brother Akila, Sister Lydia, Brother Frank, Sister Jessica Ann Mitchell Iwuyor, and Brother Kiamuya and Sister Tom, who played, pivotal roles, as regards to the functioning and the flow of the conference itself. So there was a lot of people involved, and all of them deserve your praise and accolades for a successful event. So I appreciate you all. And so I was one of the individuals who submitted an abstract or was asked to participate, and it's an honor to participate in this monumental, historical conference. And so, as stated prior, my contribution had to deal with the role of science in African liberation as it pertains to the thoughts of Marcus Garvey. And so I'm going to do that presentation for you all now, so that it is on record, here, on the channel, as for people who want to come back. And so some of this stuff y'all probably heard me say before, but there are other aspects which may be fairly new to certain individuals. So before we go into there, if you are new to the channel and you're listening for the first time or the second or third time, but you have not hit the subscribe button, I recommend that you hit the subscribe button and make sure that you hit the little bell, on the channel, so that you can be updated with the new shows that are coming, in the near future, whenever it is that I schedule them. And so hit the subscribe for those who are not subscribed, but those who are listening and you find this program to your liking, hit the like button. And so the more that you like, the more that you comment and participate, the more popular these types of videos become, and we can begin to combat some of the other information that exists, saying on the web. So I appreciate your support. And speaking of support, thank you, Brother Chavez, for your contribution. It is greatly appreciated. And, those contributions help to keep the channel going, because it does cost. And, what I intend to do in the future is, some of those donations will be used in kind of scholarship fashion, and giveaways to get things to give away to the people. So, a few people have won, free tickets to the conference. So I would love for those of you who won and attended, what your thoughts were, on the conference, of the conference, and what did you take away from it? So without further ado, I'm going to now switch my screen real quick and start the conversation. So let me check my other devices to make sure that everything is kosher, as the saying goes, and that everyone will be able to see what is going down. So everything looks good on the other devices. So I will get started. So let me do that. So again, I presented on Sunday, August 9th. And so here it is again, Marcus Garvey and the role of science in African liberation. And so for those who are not familiar with me per se and what it is that I do, I am a cognitive scientist rooted in two disciplines, in computer science and linguistics. And so these two fields are part of what we call the cognitive sciences, which are interrelated with anthropology, neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy. And, you know, in order to do what I do, especially in the realm of artificial intelligence and networks and neural networks, etc., I have to be familiar with key themes and processes and research methods in all of these different fields, because they all help in helping to understand the human condition and replicating the human mind and things in synthetic and computerized systems. And so that's my background, primarily in linguistics and computer science. And so, you know, it is from this background and understanding and experience in the sciences that has motivated me to encourage more African people to delve into the sciences, you know, whether it be biology, physics, you know, astronomy, medicine, etc. You know, these are disciplines that need more African people in it. And I should say more right-minded African people in it. And so these are some things that Marcus Garvey himself has encouraged us to get into. And he saw the reason why we would need more Africans in the sciences, and which we'll get to in a second. And so, as always, this presentation is part of the Aluja process. And Aluja being a Chiluba Bantu word meaning to make, to provide, to retrace one's steps, to refer to a place of origin, and to restore. And so the objective is to go into the past and to see the route in which we got into now, to recover that which had been lost or broken or stolen, and to restore it and to improve and strengthen that for use in modern times. And so a cognate for that term in the ancient Egyptian language, and Middle Egyptian particularly, is the word ruj or saruj, which is the causative form, meaning to make secure, to set right a wrong, to provide, to fulfill a contract, to restore, to repair, to make new again, to make, grow, or flourish. So in the idea is that by, at least for this presentation, that if we take on and adapt certain sciences, that it will help us in certain aspects of our modern struggle. And so, but, you know, a lot of us grow up thinking that the sciences itself are the, how should I say, the behavior or the doings of European people. And as a result of that, you know, a lot of us feeling insecure in our own abilities, or for other reasons, known and unknown, we have shied away from the so-called hard sciences. And this has, you know, caused a lot of problems, especially for those of us who are involved in history, because, you know, a lot of our historians not having a scientific background would make arguments which can be easily refuted had they understood science and the scientific method. And so, you know, even in our classical historical analysis, we need science. And so, you know, this is something that I want to encourage, and this is one of the reasons why, I'm one of the co-founders of Black Science Month, which is in October. And the objective is to encourage more African people, more Black people to get into the sciences, again, by appealing to our heritage. And so that is, our objective here. So moving on, the Honorable Marcus Garvey talks about the benefits of science in a 1924 speech. It was an audio speech, titled the See Me in the Whirlwind or something like that, or Catch Me in the Whirlwind. And I typed out, you can listen to it live. There is an actual live recording of this on YouTube. And so I typed out the speech, and the speech will, there's no way you can read it the way that Marcus Garvey said it. Like, he was a very dynamic speaker. And if you go on to YouTube, you'll be able to hear it for yourself. So, but in that speech, he says the following: dive down, Black men, and dig. Reach up, Black men and women, and pull all nature's knowledge to you. Turn ye around and make a conquest of everything, north and south, east and west. And then, when ye have wrought well, you would have inherited God's blessings. You would have become God's chosen people. Naturally, you become leaders of the world because of the superiority of your mind and your achievements. The world is indebted to us for the benefits of civilization. They stole our arts and sciences from Africa. Then why should we be ashamed of ourselves? And out of our own creative genius, we make ourselves what we want to be. Follow always that great law. So before I move forward, notice what he says at the beginning: to make a conquest of everything, to pull all of nature's knowledge to you. So he's saying, don't limit yourself. Learn all things, no matter where it comes from. So you have to be a individual who is, or I should say, has a hunger, a deep hunger for knowledge, to want to know all there is under the sun. And this is going to be very important, in later on in our discussion. And so, he talks about the superiority of your mind and your achievements, to be known for your intellect, your ability to reason and create. And this is something that, is not new within African heritage. In terms of written material, we have this going all the way back to ancient Kemet. And so we'll see that even a little later. But he continues on in his speech and says the following, which is very, very important. He says, there is no height to which you cannot climb without the active intelligence of your mind. And I don't know if he meant to rhyme, but, that's just Black folks and our rhythm and, even in our everyday ordinary speech. He says, mind creates as much as we desire in nature. We can have through the creation of our own minds, but in your homes, everywhere possible, you must teach the higher developments of what? Science to your children, and make sure that we have a race of scientists par excellence. For in science lies our only hope to withstand the evil designs of modern materialism. And so Marcus Garvey, being a student of history, regardless to, whatever flaws he may have in ideology in regards to African people on certain topics or certain points, one thing that he understood is that in order for us to move forward and be able to defend ourselves, both physically, economically, materially, whatever, we need to have a firm grasp of science. But not only but he's noticed that he doesn't talk about like a few individuals become scientists. He says that let me back up. But in your homes and everywhere possible, you must teach the higher developments of science to your children, and to make sure that we have a race of scientists par excellence. So again, we're talking about a community, like it's just a standard that when people think of Black African folks, they're automatically thinking of a population full of great thinkers and scientists. And so, this is what he was pushing. This is 1924. And so it is from this, in just an analysis or a deep and critical analysis of this small portion of his speech, is a whole lecture unto itself. So, we're going to move beyond this a little bit and expand on in just what ways can science help us in this endeavor. So, but before we can move forward, we'd have to define exactly what science is. And so, you have a lot of people in the modern times talking about this type of science, for example, Moorish science, and Kemetic or Christian science or whatever. But a lot of folks don't really understand what science is. And so, in my book Alluja Volume 2, I discuss science in terms of its history and things, but we'll deal with this in terms of the modern understanding of science. So science is the use of evidence to construct testable explanations and predictions of natural phenomena, as well as the knowledge generated through this process. So notice what I have bolded. It is the use of evidence to construct testable explanations and predictions of natural phenomena, as well as the knowledge generated through this process. And so, if it can't be tested, it cannot be included in terms of what science is. And, I get into a lot of trouble, especially with people who claim to be African spiritualists, because they'll talk about spiritual science, but then don't want to test any of the claims made by a spiritualist. It can't be science, because science is a field of study where we don't believe you is the basis, of all examinations of claims. You have to convince a community of critical thinkers, and it's through consensus by the experimentation of a body of people in hundreds and sometimes thousands of tests being committed, do we confer that something is in fact a matter of fact. And so we just don't believe you because you have a personal relationship with a particular spirit and you got a revelation in your head that this is what it is regarding the natural world and existence unto itself. It must be demonstratable, and other people must be able to come behind you and verify your statements. So this is what separates religion and spirituality from science. In religion, and especially with certain spiritual folks, to question the wisdom of your ancestors is a sin. In science, to test the wisdom of your ancestors is a requirement, because in science, there is no, knowledge that is set once and for all. Everything must be retested and reanalyzed in the future. Now, this is when we deal with probabilities, and why these hundreds of and sometimes thousands of tests are conducted, so that you have a high statistical number of the probability that if we conduct one more test, that we're going to get the same outcome. And so the reliability of science in regards to the natural world is predicated on this ability to be able to test things. And this is especially an attitude that we need to have in the modern times, because everybody are suggesting moves forward, but have not tested them in any way. And without the test, without the proof of concept, then we can't move forward on certain things. So by having a scientifically literate mind, we are able to ask greater and more deeper and more critical questions about life, and to even be able to have that creative mind to think of more powerful solutions to problems that we may face. So this is one of the things that, Marcus Garvey understood at that early time, and why he pushed for African people to become scientists and to be able to fend off the others who have mastered the sciences, but because they lacked character, utilize that information as weapons against African people. And so, regardless to what people may think, you're not going to have a spiritual solution to material problems. You're going to have to deal with the material world. And so this is one way in which we can know how the material world operates and how we can move forward. So as I stated, scientific knowledge and understanding accumulate from the interplay of observation and explanation. Scientists gather information by observing the natural world and conducting experiments. They then propose how the systems being studied behave in general, basing their explanations on the data provided through their experiments and other observations. They test their explanations by conducting additional observations and experiments under different conditions. Other scientists confirm their observations independently and carry out additional studies that may lead to more sophisticated explanations and predictions about future observations and experiments. In these ways, scientists continually arrive at more accurate and more comprehensive explanations of particular aspects of nature. So remember what I said. In science, there's no such thing as an absolute truth. And that's what separates, again, science from religion, because they believe that they have a revelation that's it. There's nothing else to know beyond that point. Science doesn't deal with that or does not have that attitude. So this is the scientific method, which I won't get into, but I'll leave it up here. So if anybody wants to, pause the archive video, they can observe this more in depth. And as I stated, the ancient Egyptians, were fierce advocates of science and scientific knowledge, so much so that they personified science in two deities, as the goddess Sheshet and the god Jehuti, better known as Thoth. Those are two, that's the feminine and masculine personification of the sciences. And what separates, of course, science from mere revelation is that science adheres and respects proper methodology. Their epistemology, how do we know, a care and concern for the right paths and procedures to knowledge. And so the ancient Egyptian language, tells us, some of these terms, along those lines. So you have the word tep, meaning way of doing something, method, cipher, key, example, in mathematics. Then you have the phrase tep haseb, meaning the correct method, norm or reckoning. Then you have medu, method, and then tep ini irit, working method. And so, they have this care and concern with not only having knowledge or information, but how did you get the information? What was your path to knowing? And they understood that there was a proper way to do something and an improper way to gathering information and it becoming knowledge. And so we see this in the Rhind mathematical papyrus, the first line. So that phrase tep haseb, That's here, right here. So this is the transliteration of the meta-ntr, and on the right is the translation. So I should say, yeah, the transliteration and the translation. And this is from the Rhind mathematical papyrus. So it starts off saying the correct method of investigating nature to know all that exists. That sounds just like what Marcus Garvey said in terms of knowing all things of nature. It continues, all mysteries and all things secret. For that purpose, this papyrus roll was copied in the year 33, 4th month of Aket, under the majesty of the king of Upper and Lower Kemet, Al-Wasir Ra, may he live. So again, when we talk about what separates and makes science, what separates it from revelation and religion is the methodology for knowing. That's what makes science. And so you can replace that, saying the correct method, the scientific method or scientific way of investigating nature to know all that exists, all mysteries and all things secret. So they understood the scientific process for understanding the natural world. And so in my book, Illusion Volume 2, as I stated before, I deal with this in 2 chapters. So chapter 3 is meta-ntr, a catalyst for an African scientific renaissance. Some of that will be discussed in this lecture. And then chapter 4, the African origin of the word science. And I was compelled to write chapter 4 because in our dealings with our people, as I stated in the beginning, there are a lot of us who believe that science is the activity and was born from the white man. And then they try to shun information, especially information that goes contrary to their beliefs, because that information was brought about as a result of a scientific analysis. And this is very problematic, especially, as Marcus Garvey recognized, when he used the phrase in the speech that I read, that they stole, meaning the Europeans, and we can include the Arabs, our arts and sciences. So why should we be ashamed of ourselves? That's what he states. And we got to understand what that means. What are the implications? If the Africans are the birthplace of even the word science itself and its processes, as I discussed in Illusion Volume 2, then it is incumbent upon us to continue that tradition and to expand on what these ancestral energies have started in the ancient past. So I'll continue. So this chapter 3 that I mentioned, meta-ntr as a catalyst for an African scientific renaissance, I discuss using this concept that I call mdw-ntr. And mdw-ntr would be equivalent to what is now called biomimicry. And biomimicry was a term coined by the lady that you see on the left-hand side. Her name is Janan Benyus. And it is a framework that is a new discipline that studies nature's best ideas, and it imitates these designs and processes to solve human problems sustainably. This strategy relies on first learning the mechanistic principle used by a living system to achieve a particular function, one that attempts to adapt the principle to achieve similar function in a synthetic material. In order to do this, one has to look at nature differently, as model, measure, and mentor. And so what this is essentially saying is that this process that we call biomimicry mimics biological systems and synthetic processes in materials. And so we study nature, we see how it functions, and then we try to imitate what we see naturally in nature, so that whatever it is that we create in terms of process, in terms of materials, that it can be done in a sustainable way. because nature is always adapting and evolving itself to work most efficiently given the conditions it finds itself in. And so it tries, we know that the earth is a closed system. And so everything, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. That's the same thing, of course, with material, since energy really is a characteristic of matter. It's a property of matter. And so when we talk about, matter, or energy cannot be created nor destroyed, it's really talking about matter. It can only change form. And so when we create certain materials and things, that it has to work in a way that the whole system benefits. Without that, then, you can destroy a system and make it very hard for life to flourish within the parameters of that particular system. And so this is what I want to update in Marcus Garvey's call to action from 1924, so that not only do we get into the sciences, but that we get into the sciences with the understanding that we want to create and do things that is sustainable for the earth biosystems. And that whatever it is we create, just because we think we have a good idea, that, we don't create something that is damaging to the environment itself. So this is essentially, what we're, faced with, and what I want to, kind of delve in today. So we continued in terms of the definition of biomimicry. As I stated, it uses an ecological standard to judge the sustainability of human innovations. Therefore, nature becomes a guide from which we learn how to innovate holistically. And so this is, just more of what I had stated, earlier. So hold on, let me go down. So an example of biomimicry in action is a new line of solar panels that are being designed, inspired by simple leaves that we find on everyday plants and trees, in vegetation in general. And so a few key concepts, is going to be important for us in understanding the role of plants in dealing with, gathering energy from the sun and transforming that energy into other usable, kinetic energy. So you have this concept, photovoltaic effect, the phenomena of electricity being created when certain materials are exposed to light. Solar energy conversion efficiency, the percentage of photons which are converted into electrical current in a solar cell. You have photosynthesis, the process by which plants and some microbes convert solar energy into chemical energy and ultimately food. And then desensitized solar cells, a solar cell technology that includes elements that emulate photosynthesis. So this is what I was talking about, for example, when we talk about solar cells. So as we're trying to get away from fossil fuels, because that is not sustainable, we'll be running out of fossil fuels soon. And then just the creation of usable fossil fuels and its leakage and damage to the environment is very great. And so we want to reduce that carbon footprint. And one of the ways in which we can do that is to, try to use more solar energy as much as possible, given the natural size of the sun and how much photons in the form of light that it emits, on a daily. And it'll be, millions of years until the sun fizzles out, and then there's just no more life in this particular solar system. So, and so when we look into nature, what in nature actually utilizes the sun in that way and is able to convert it into other forms of energy. And so that's where the plant comes in. And so we noticed that the surface area, plants are very thin, but wide in general. And that is so that it can maximize the absorption of photons from the sun. And so its usage, there's no such thing as 100% efficient material, but its efficiency is very high given the small, usable area, of plants. And so if we can take this knowledge of how plants convert sunlight into energy, then we can create synthetic biomimetic systems along that same, knowledge scheme. And so I would encourage, for people to kind of investigate this and, get your children involved and help them to become the next scientists if they are scientifically minded and inclined, so that we have more of us involved in biomimicry, because this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so, as more of these big companies are forced to shift how they create materials and things because of the environment. So remember, there's tax incentives and just penalty incentives for developing more sustainable materials. Because if you, for example, have a manufacturing plant that emits a certain amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, then you can be penalized and fined a number. And so by developing more sustainable ways to create their materials that it doesn't leave a large carbon footprint, they save money in the long term because of the tax benefits and, regarding lawsuits and things of that nature. So that's what we want to, where we want to go. So we got to start thinking bigger in terms of our application and knowledge of science. And so what I do, where every time y'all see me when I say this is Brother Asarimhotep for the mdw-ntr Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture, what I do is I teach mdw-ntr, the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic script, as a means to lead young people into the sciences. And it serves a multitude of purposes, but mainly it appeals to, younger folks because ancient Egypt is just a fascinating society, first and foremost. But the objective is to get them into the sciences by appealing to their heritage. And so they can identify with ancient Egypt and they can see the output of ancient Egypt in terms of science. And so if you're able to capture them by that means, it'll be easier for them to understand science and its purpose. And so one of the reasons why I start with mdw-ntr, the hieroglyphic writing system, is because it allows one to think differently, because you have to think in a pictorial type of way. You have to think in a mathematic and code type of way. And that's the kind of thinking that you need to succeed in any type of scientific endeavor. So it's a mental training process. And so I don't get too deep into mdw-ntr where they can just read, whole slabs of material and writings of things. I leave that to our good brother Sanjeti or our good brother Wujawu. I teach them the very fundamental basics, and from there they're able to lift off into other areas. But this particular process, which I call mdw-ntr, mdw-ntr is the company, but mdw-ntr is the process, or ndele, I should say, is the process by which they come to discover these things. So, we know that mdw-ntr is defined as God's words in the hieroglyphs. And so what you see here in the right-hand corner is the word mdw-ntr. And even though the word netr by this sign here is in front is actually read secondly. And so this stick, this medu stick, is read first. So this is divine or God or whatnot, and this is the word for word, speech, etc. And so, as I state, the initial writing script was a development inspired by and which borrowed images from nature. The very phonemes and ideograms were representations of the natural environment: mammals, trees, human beings, human occupations, birds, parts of animals, celestial bodies, mountains, rivers, etc. And this is what you see when you actually look at hieroglyphs. And so when it comes to biomimicry, biomimicry teaches you how to pay attention to nature and how it functions. It helps to open your eyes to processes in nature that you may not have been paying attention to. What I argue is that this is exactly what the script and learning how to write the script allows you to do. And so when you're looking at why does this vulture have this type of beak in the front? What is the biological advantage of that? When you see a bird in flight and you draw it, why does it land in a certain way? What could you learn from that? What is the material? What are the feathers made of? Why does the water come off the feathers so fluidly? What is the materials that allow for such things to happen? So this is a sacrifice of duck. This is water. We can see even human inventions in terms of baskets. This is a heart right here. Other birds, and eyes. A wide variety of things were used in the actual hieroglyphic script. And so by writing in hieroglyphs or sesh meta-netcher, you are forced to deal with nature and to see and look directly into the eyes of nature. And so the Egyptians were the first, historically speaking, in terms of written evidence, are the first people to utilize biomimicry in a unique way. And so they looked at nature and decided to imitate biomimetically what they saw in nature, and they created a writing system. So they looked at how nature communicated with itself and decided to take that inspiration so that we can effectively communicate with each other throughout time. And so the disadvantage of oral tradition is that, if you want to communicate exactly what you have in mind, you can't do that because there's no way for the other folks to verify that this is exactly what you mean and say. And so in oral traditions, even though there is, in certain oral traditions, there is a strict adherence to the word, as we can see with the advent of slavery, slavery has severed those ties. And so we lost, those of us in the diaspora more specifically, have lost those oral traditional knowledge about, certain realities and things, because people have been scattered, elders have been killed, and so we lost a lot of knowledge. That's another part of the Holocaust of enslavement that is not talked about very often. How much knowledge was actually lost as a result of the breaking up of the educational system of Africa and those elders and specialists who had a wide range of knowledge, as a result of their deaths, their untimely deaths, and their inability to transfer that knowledge, from to the next generation and beyond. And so when you have stuff in writing, it preserves your thought and culture and processes for a lot longer. It can, the ancient Egyptians are still speaking to us in 2020, even though their society, for the most part, died off over 2,000 years ago. Even after the invasions by the Greeks, the Persians, the Romans, the Libyans, and now the Arabs in that area. So, but even after all of that, we still have access to over 3,500 years of history and knowledge from the ancient Egyptians themselves due to the writing. And so, this is the first, biomimetic creation, I should say, in history, coming out of the Nile Valley and whatnot. And they also use biomimicry in creating other aspects in terms of temples, pyramids, other processes. They look to nature for inspiration and try to emulate it as best as humanly possible. So mdw-ntr, I have defined, and you'll get more of this in Illusion Volume 2, is simply a way of translating nature's inspiration into experience. Or we could say that it is an inventive problem-solving technique. So mdw-ntr is a process. It is a discovery of the laws by which phenomena comes to be. We could define it also as the knowledge or history of nature's becomings, the knowledge of nature's genius, the principles for excellence, a paradigm of moral grounding and human flourishing, and as stated earlier, a mentor, model, and measure in terms of mdw-ntr, meta nature or biomimicry. So, this is my contribution in the advancement of science and culture. But I want to go further to remind us of this aspect of Marcus Garvey's speech. Remember what he said, but in your homes and everywhere possible, you must teach the higher developments of science to your children and make sure, and he repeats in the speech, and make sure that we have a race of scientists par excellence. For in science lies our only hope to withstand the evil designs of modern materialism. Now, what he's saying here is that the idea, the principles, the methodologies of science and scientific and critical thinking have to be standard and a part of our culture in general. Like everywhere we go, it should be expected that, you see a Black person or an African American or whatnot, and it should be assumed that they have some kind of scientific literacy. Now, we know that's ideal. And, but he's just saying that it's so ingrained in the culture that that's just what you expect. So just to the point, it's a stereotype. And the Chinese and Japanese have that stereotype. So besides the kung fu and samurai and ninja stereotype with these particular East Asians, there's always the assumption, for better or for worse, that these people are highly intelligent and very highly scientifically literate. And this is something that, because they respect science and knowledge so much, that it is expected, that is so ingrained in the educational system of the Chinese and the Japanese, that we have stereotyped them to assume and expect that every Japanese or Chinese person is some kind of engineer or a software hacker, or a doctor in medicine or something to this nature. To me, that's not a bad stereotype to have, but there's a downfall to that as well, because if you come across a Chinese or a Japanese person who's not any of that, some people may look at that as a failure, but we don't want to get that extreme. Just making the point here that it is culture that is going to be very instrumental, not only in terms of the promotion of science, but even to the development of science itself. And so, as I stated in the text, in dealing with mdw-ntr and meta nature as a catalyst for the African American scientific renaissance, that creative genius, resourceful intention, and artistic inventions of humans do not develop ex nihilo. Something fundamental has to be the driving force that conceives and gives birth to these innovations. Something has to be the catalyst, and this energy must permeate through the total sphere of human cognition and existence. This catalyst is culture. All technology within a social practice is a product of culture. This is because culture is a phenomenon which encompasses all the material and non-material expressions of a people. It affects the way people interact with nature and therefore varies with the environment. So this is something that has to be, understood. And I state essentially that, I'm of the opinion that culture plays a germane role in the scientific and technological transformation of any society. If Africa is to recover from the Holocaust of enslavement and its colonial after effects, it must first ground itself in its own traditions. From there, Africa must utilize its cultures as a springboard to generate processes and technologies that will secure a sustainable future for its members. That's why I ground this conversation in the mdw-ntr, in the culture of Africa, and she entered into in the larger sphere of things. Having that cultural ground, it inspires. This is where the imagination really comes into play here, in the artistic sense, because through the arts and culture comes the questions that are necessary for the processes of science to emerge. So think about like all the technologies that we have now, like self-driving cars, or watches that you can talk through and you can see someone's face in, cell phones, space travel, et cetera, et cetera. All of this stuff comes from comic books in the United States and other things that are generated from the culture. So it's from the arts oftentimes that emerge the discoveries of science, because the scientist is like, I wonder if we can create that and make that happen. Let's see if that is legit. And oftentimes, science figures out a way to make these different technologies that may have been inspired by, comic books, for example, or certain types of oral traditions. And so this is why, the culture piece is important. So what is culture? I define culture as the active synthesis of the collective social norms, values, and creative inventory of a population that it is utilized to solve its problems. So again, the synthesis of the collective social norms, the values, and the creative inventory of a population. But that all three of those things are utilized to solve problems. And so, you have a viable culture if your culture solves your problems. If you are having a ton of problems in your culture, then your culture needs to change. There is nothing sacred about culture. The purpose of culture is to solve human problems. And so this is why, if you have a scientifically supportive and literate culture, you already have the mindset and worldview and processes in order to solve problems, because ultimately that's what a culture is supposed to do. And so we have others who have weighed in on culture. And so our great elder, Dr. Wade Nobles, in his article, The Infusion of African and African American Content, a question of content and intent, states that technically culture is the vast structure of behaviors, ideas, attitudes, values, habits, beliefs, customs, language, rituals, ceremonies, and practices peculiar to a particular group of people, which provides them with a general design for living and patterns for interpreting reality. So look at that last part. Patterns for interpreting reality. So when we talk about nature and in interpreting that aspect of reality, you need a certain process for that. That's where the science comes in. And so if you have a scientifically literate culture and population, they have a proper lens in which to interpret reality. And so this is one of the reasons why science is important, moving forward, dealing with our people. So a researcher by the name of Adebayo Ogunbura states that, hence, the emphasis on culture is based on the idea that technological advancement without the skillful exploration of a people's culture is impossible, because culture is the driving force that fuels and inspires technological accomplishments in human society. So this is something that I stated, earlier, that it is from the culture that emerges the scientific inventions. And so these go hand in hand. So when you make science part of your culture, there's no telling how far or how wide, it can go. Excuse me. Continuing. This sister here, Garvey Maathai of Kenya, she passed away a number of years ago. But in 2004, she won the Nobel Peace Prize because she inaugurated an initiative to plant trees all across Kenya and essentially all across Africa and the world. Because she noticed that when she was growing up, so much more in terms of health and scenery was available to her, especially things like clean water, when they had an abundance of trees in their environment. But as soon as capitalism came in and decided to, wipe out all the trees, all kinds of stuff started going wrong in her community. And so recognizing this, she started this initiative, and everyone started noticing how the environment and everything improved, from social relations to health to a wide variety of things, and especially in terms of agriculture and food production and stuff to this nature, just by having the trees there. So, at her 2004 acceptance speech for the Nobel Peace Prize, she says the following: culture plays a central role in the political, economic, and social life of communities. Indeed, culture may be the missing link in the development of Africa. Culture is dynamic and evolves over time. Consciously discarding retrogressive traditions, like female genital mutilation, for example, and embracing aspects that are good and useful, Africans especially should rediscover positive aspects of their culture. In accepting them, they will give themselves a sense of belonging, identity, and self-confidence. And so she's essentially arguing here that when Africans embrace their culture and start from there as the grounding in weighing what aspects are beneficial and what are not, then we'll be able to grow and strengthen ourselves as African people and Africa as a continent as a whole. But it is grounded in that. And it's ironic that, she noticed the importance of the planting of trees, because this is something that is ancient, not ancient Egyptian in particular, but you find this in ancient Egypt. So when you read the Harris Papyrus, the Pharaoh Ramesses III, in his declarations and Sibayet or whatnot, talks about, and he states that I restored the whole land with trees and vegetation. And notice this word here, saruj, aluja. It's the causative form of Rouge, but this is Aluja in the ancient Egyptian language. And so here we go again with that restoration, that strengthening. In other words, I added value to the land by planting trees and other vegetation. And so we see that he had an environmental consciousness, and that this was, and when we find this theme in several other places in ancient Kemet. And so, we got to understand the role of plants and animals in the system, which I mentioned earlier. And so this requires a scientific mind. But as we can see, this is a part of the value system and the culture of the people. And this is what allowed them to thrive in ancient times. And it's ironic because I don't know what the word ma'atai means in the language, but it sounds close enough to the word ma'at, and so she's a modern personification of the concept of ma'at and the goddess Ma'at, from ancient Egyptian times. So, this aspect of science and scientific teaching is very important and was recognized even by the late Sheikh Anta Diop. And in an interview, he talks about the importance of science, and he says, and especially its transference. So he says, on the other hand, the way a society goes about transmitting knowledge, for example, is fundamental to the development of its technology and crucial to its overall expansion. So this leads into the second part of the conversation, where he says, in this respect, the system of initiation whereby knowledge is transmitted in African society is typically Egyptian. Yet, this system, which is generalized in African societies, is not the best way to transmit or generalize scientific knowledge. This has been extremely harmful to the technological and social development of traditional Black societies. The monopoly of knowledge by a restricted group of religious men has been detrimental to the development of African societies. So when we're talking about grounding ourselves in African traditions, this does not mean wholesale copying everything they did with this fantasy of we need to keep it pure, because certain ways that African people did certain things is what allowed the outsiders to come in and wreak havoc on the community. And so if you only have scientific knowledge in the hands of a few elders, that means the people, the young folks who have the energy and the zeal or whatnot, cannot create and utilize that knowledge even in the defense of its people. And so because you're not creating, any kind of technology or systems which can boost your economy, you're not creating any technologies or systems in which you can defend your people against, outsiders and things. And so this requires, because that's not part of the culture. The culture told us that, you don't get any deep knowledge about the universe until you become an elder and you go through these levels of initiation. But science has to be, you can't do science like that, and not only that, there's another aspect of this which he doesn't speak on, and that is that you can't question the wisdom of your elders in traditional African society. So if you're in an initiation system and your success depends on your close relationship with the elders, and you are at a level where you don't know anything and can't ask deep questions and things of this nature, you're not going to be able to create a scientifically literate society, because science requires you to question the wisdom of your ancestors and to improve upon what they have done. And so this is something that also separates ancient Egypt from a lot of other African societies, because they had this concept of Aluja, Saruj, the restoring and strengthening. When you really look at those terms in the ancient Egyptian texts, they're always talking about improving and doing better than what their predecessors did. And so even though there was a strong tradition and a respect for elders and ancestors, the expectation was that you were to do better than your ancestors and your elders. And so they're accumulating all of this knowledge so that you and the generations coming after can go further. And so this has to be part of the mindset, you know, of the time. Hold on one sec before I continue. Okay. And so, again, going back to culture, Dr. Amos Wilson informs us that culture is a political organization. And as he articulates it in Blueprint for Black Power, this coalescence of subcultural social units is usually organized and motivated by a mutually recognized leadership or governing establishment. This establishment usually fulfills its responsibilities through the creation, issuance, and enforcement of policies. At this level of organization, a culture may be defined as a political organization, which exercises political power in its defense, economic, social interests as a whole, and in the interests of its subcultural group and individual members. So if we understand culture as a political organization, and we are arguing that it is the culture that is the primary motivator for scientific advancement, then, you know, we got to think of it as the culture itself, again, as an organization that organizes and gathers resources and creates institutions that aim to bring the best out of its members, its peoples who adhere to the culture. And so, you know, the culture, the political body politic has to create those systems and has to create those institutions in order for science to thrive within the culture and the community at large. And so, you know, there's a deeper aspect of this. And so it's not that we just learn science from Europeans. We learn science regardless to where it's coming from, but we also create our own institutions where we can teach and pass on sciences, because that's what a governing body does. And so if your culture is a political organization, the politics, you know, needs to at the highest of its values recognize the need for indigenous educational institutions and systems for passing on and expanding this knowledge. And so the World Conference of Science says the overall economic and social development of the African nations can easily and beneficially be accelerated through the adaptation, assimilation, internalization, innovation, and invention of new technologies. The article, The State of South African Science, says, we know that science creates wealth and jobs. We do not want to remain consumers of science and technology from other countries. We have to invest in science for ourselves. Again, this comes as a result of the politics, the political organizations, the government investing in education and scientific endeavors. And so our culture is our government, or is the invisible arm of our interpersonal government. And so we need to understand this importance of science, because you're not going to have an economy without it, because you have to, there's millions of problems that need to be solved with human beings across the world. And we need new processes. We need more advanced technologies that will allow for us to do that. But again, from the biomimetic and the mdw-ntr framework, it needs to be done sustainably. So if we want to create jobs, if we want to be able to hire our own people, we're going to need to have more inventors in our population. And so this is one example that I always like to give, and this is our good brother Lonnie Johnson, you know, who was born on October 6, 1949. He's an African-American engineer, best known as the inventor of the Super Soaker water gun, which was the top-selling toy in the United States in 1991 and 92. Now, I was a young child at this time in history, and you couldn't tell me nothing after the Super Soaker came out. I started my own militia based on the presence of the Super Soaker. That it was such a hot toy, back in 91, 92. And it spun off all kinds of imitations and things. But the inventor of the Super Soaker was indeed this brother, Lonnie Johnson. And so, he got paid initially, saying from it. He had to go back and sue to get some other royalties that were owed him. But as a result of the millions of dollars that was afforded him because of this simple invention, he was able to create his own company. And so, matter of fact, he has created two companies. So I'll just read this on the side. Two of Johnson's companies, Acceleratron Solid State and Johnson Electromechanical Systems, are developing energy technology. Acceleratron is introducing thin film batteries, a new generation of rechargeable battery technology, which has significantly better abilities than the current industry leader, Li-ion. GEMS, the acronym of that, has developed the Johnson Thermal Electrical Converter System, JTEC for short, which was listed by Popular Mechanics as one of the top 10 inventions of 2008. It has potential applications including solar power plants and ocean thermal power generation. It converts thermal energy into electrical energy using a non-steam process which works by pushing hydrogen ions through two membranes with significant advantages over alternative systems, and it is claimed to be highly scalable. So we go back to the beginning of our conversation when we're talking about the solar technology. So he's taking this heat energy, in terms of these photons and light or whatnot, and turn it into other forms of energy. And so as a result of his engineering knowledge, and matter of fact, the invention of the Super Soaker was a freak accident dealing with his water hose. And so he looked at the dynamics of that, improved it, and made a water gun out of it. And and sold it and made a lot of money, saying from it. But as a result of his invention, just inventing a toy, he was able to create these two companies, which creates jobs, as always. So it sustains the community. So if we had more people like Lonnie Johnson, we could, but you also have to qualify. So, if you're doing solid state and electromechanical systems, in order for Lonnie to hire you, you need to become an engineer yourself, at least on that aspect, of the company, the higher paying portions of it. And so this is where we want to get. And so we need those people who can recognize and understand how nature works, and it can create, institutions, jobs, and inventions that can benefit our families first and foremost, so that you can start creating, generational wealth, but then the community at large. So imagine, like, with all these different companies right now trying to rush to get a vaccine for COVID-19, if we had our own research institutes and medical companies that would be in that race and solves the problem of COVID-19, et cetera. How much would that company make in the near future? And be responsible for helping to restore the economy to a healthy place or whatnot. So these are the kinds of things that we got to understand in terms of science, like the benefits, of science. And so, there's not much that I have to say, after this, but ultimately this is, where we're talking about. So when Marcus Garvey again talks about this is the way that we fight against the materialism, we have to be inventors, we have to be creators, we have to manufacture our own things. And so there's a plethora of ways that we can do this, and we can do this even aesthetically in our own unique way, based on the culture that we develop and evolve. And so I like this little meme here, and it says, if you give someone a fish, they eat for a day. If you teach someone to fish, they can feed themselves until the water is contaminated or the shoreline is seized for development. But if you teach someone to think critically and be politically conscious, then whatever the challenge, they can organize with their peers and fight for their interest. And so this is one of the things that science does. It helps to develop a more critically astute and politically conscious mind. And if you have a population of critical and political thinkers, then we have a better chance of fighting for our own interests and not making decisions, for example, like voting for certain people based off of our emotions and how they make us feel in the moment. That we can look at the bigger picture and act accordingly. So, with that said, I look for a united Bukanda, formerly known as Africa, and I envision, us being the leaders of the free world as a result of the intelligence of our mind and the creative aspects of our spirit and our high human component, to our being. And we set the example of how to live in the world and live more abundantly. And so I'll be doing a lecture sometime in the future called African Culture as Advanced Technology. And I'm kind of outlining that slowly as we speak, and I'll let everybody know when you are able to join that discussion and do it. And so, hold on one sec. I don't know why this is not working here. Anyway, so with that, I end the conversation, and I will look to see if there's any comments or questions. So I'll stop sharing my screen. So I have not been paying attention to the chat. So give me a second to scroll and see if there is anything worthy of being repeated. And let me see. Thank you, Bilala Khan, for your comment. I appreciate you and coming in and saying hello, in the chat. Appreciate it very much. Uja Seneb to you as well. I appreciate you very much for your support and for your kind words. And if anybody wants to, support in terms of books, you can get everything you need at asarimhotep.com. So thank you for that. I will continue. Let me see. He says, nature's efficiency is a result of evolutionary processes over time. What works is kept via natural selection. Indeed. And so June Money says he's in the solar field and would be interesting to know exactly, what you do in that field. They are using spinach and so on. Chigu Evans says that they are using, I assume it's supposed to be spinach in certain solar panels. I don't know if it is, I haven't seen spinach using the solar panel, but that would be interesting if they do. Let me see. Says want, but see, now you're speaking of spirituality and mythology. I will have to kind of revisit what aspect of the conversation I was saying, so I know exactly what you're responding to. He says, Amoa Salam says, not only is technology a product of culture, but so too is science itself. Exactly. And matter of fact, there's a, let me find it. What chapter is that in? This is my book. I'm reading from Aluja Volume 2. And is it in Seneb? Hold on. I think it's in, is it in Madhu and Della chapter, or it may be on the African origin of the word science. So let me try that one. African origin of the word science, which is chapter 4 of the text. Because I want to speak to that point that was just made. Because this is coming from the ancient Egyptians that supports that commentary. Okay, so it's actually a Greek text, but it's talking, the Greek text is writing down what the African philosophers, the ancient Egyptians, told them. And so for those who have my book, it's on page 229. And so I'm reading towards the bottom. And it's a Greek philosopher, Diogenes Laertius, in the 3rd century AD, or it may be a Roman, in his work, Life Doctrines and Maxims of Renowned Philosophers. He sums up the Nicomachean philosophy in the introduction as such. There is the first principle matter, because I think Solon is the philosopher that's being spoken to by the Egyptian priests. There is the first principle matter, then the 4 elements become disassociated. Then the living beings were formed, the sun and the moon. No, I'm sorry, that's the wrong quote. That's not what I'm looking for. But I want to, this is an important quote because this demonstrates that the ancient Egyptians knew the earth was round. And I'll just continue. The sun and the moon are gods. One was called Osiris and the other was Isis. They thought that the world had a beginning, that it would have an end, that it was spherical, that the stars were made of fire and their heat gave birth to everything on the surface of the earth, that the soul was eternal, that rain came from a transformation of air. This is a Greek philosopher talking about the ancient Egyptians' understanding of science and scientific phenomena. But what I was looking for, yes, it's actually on page 230. So I apologize for those who actually have the book. And so, yes, I was correct. He was speaking to the Greek philosopher Solon, and it's in Plato's Timaeus, or Timaeus, I think that's how you pronounce it. He says the Egyptian philosopher actually says to Solon, the Greek philosopher, as for the intellectual life, you observe no doubt what care the law among us Egyptians devotes to it, beginning with the first principles touching upon the universe. Our law has organized all discoveries down to divination and medicine, whose concern is health. From speculation about divinities, it has derived human applications and supervised the acquisition of all other knowledge generated therefrom. And so from this idea of their spirituality investigating the concept of deity, which they believe rests and exists in nature, it is from that grounding that all the other scientific knowledge originated. And so, to that point, from Amo Salam, not only is technology a product of culture, but so too is science itself. And so this is something that the ancient Egyptians themselves have informed us of. And so technology is essentially the application of science. And in reality, though, technology, see, people think that technology is like, this is my camera. This is a Nikon, camera with the little light in front of it or whatnot. So this is what I use to, take photographs and shoot videos and stuff with. So when people think of technology, they think of this. But the word technology itself has to do with a way in which you do something. It's not the byproduct itself. It's the way that you do it and the way in which the physical form behaves and does things in reality. So this is why, this is something I'm going to explain more in detail, and why I argue that African culture is advanced technology. It's a technique, it's a manner, it's a way of moving about in the world. So, this technique is more efficient than me trying to carve, an image into some stone and to have it replicate or be an exact replica of that which I have seen or envisioned. This technique, the technique is the mirror inside, the battery which allows, the power and the button being pressed, and capturing the photons of light and reflecting back, like all of that. It's the system, it's the process for which this represents. That is the technology. This isn't necessarily the technology, it's the system which is encapsulated within this device that is the technology. And so that's what we got to understand about technology. So your culture is a technology. And so when it comes time for that lecture, I'll expand, more on that. Yes, the citation reads Van Sertima for those two slides. Yes, because it's in Van Sertima's book on Shekinah. That's literally the title of the book. Great African Thinkers, Shekinah. So that's the label of the book. So, but it's edited by Van Sertima, and it's a journal actually, but the journal's in book form, and there's many contributors to that particular text. And so what I was citing was a transcription of an interview that Shekinah did when he came to the United States in 1884, 1885, 1984, 85. I think he died in 86. So it says should read Diop. No, it shouldn't, because the citation is Van Sertima. And that's when you saw Van Sertima, you also saw 1986 or something like that, page 245. So that was the citation. It wasn't in reference to Diop himself. And very relevant topic presentation, well researched and fact based as usual. Enjoying it. Thank you for listening and watching. I'm so used to doing radio. Indeed. Says thank you. Yep, Dr. Johnson made my summers fun with the Super Soaker. I'm telling you, like the last days of school, we had these water fights, and Super Soaker was at the center of the wars that we had on the east side, due to the Super Soaker with some added water balloons for bomb effect. Let me see. Okay, I don't really see any questions, but thank you, Michael A, for watching and for your kind words. And same with Jeremiah Africa. Great presentation, Brother Sar. Black Africa Power and Intelligence. Same to you, good brother. Let's see. If you're saying science emerges from culture, wouldn't you agree that all cultures has at their cores a collective myth or non-verifiable belief? I think all cultures have that aspect of the culture itself. Remember that I'm not equating culture to science. I'm saying that science emerges out of a value system. See, the value system is this need and respect of truth. And for those who are trying to understand truth, they're going to have to ask the question, well, how do we know what is true? What ways can we discover truth about reality? And so the culture will say that, we value these processes for understanding reality and coming closer to the truth. And so much so that we value this, that when we pull our money together and create a school and institution, this is what we're going to teach our children, so that when they become the power holders of the community, they will keep this going, because our ability to survive in the future depends on having a large body of scientists and inventors and creative people. So this is how you know you have a viable culture, because not only do you have the value system, you utilize your resources to create the kinds of institutions to develop the types of people that you need for the culture to thrive ongoing into the future. So they can have myths and stuff all they want. Myths serves a different purpose. Spirituality and religion serve a different purpose. Science itself serves a different purpose, and they can all exist simultaneously within a body politic. But what you don't want are so-called religious folks and mythological folks trying to create motor vehicles or spaceships, or to be involved in creating medicines and stuff to that nature that require a good working knowledge of reality and nature itself. And so as the quote unquote conscious community has seen, we have too many people who have done no training whatsoever trying to give medical advice to folks with serious conditions. And there's a reason why even the European recognized this in the United States, that we can't thrive and we can't move forward having these snake oil salesmen just create anything without any kind of basis in reality. And that's what we got to avoid. And so, you have somebody who claims that they got a revelation in a dream about a particular ingredient for medicine. And then, they may not have remembered the dream accurately all the way, and then go get something and then recommend it for you, not knowing your medical history, anything about the body in terms of cells and DNA and history and all of that other kind of stuff, and prescribe something to you that ultimately injures you further. And so you can't put the health and the future of your community in the hands of people who don't take learning and reality something serious. And so that's what we're trying to avoid. And so this is the battle between the church and state situation, among Europeans, because you have too many snake oil salesmen and they have a revelation and belief and will say something that you can't verify and will further bring the community down. So when white folks, when it comes time for their military and their school systems and stuff to this nature, and when they're trying to teach their people to win in the future, they teach them science. Now you can learn everything else and live comfortably, but when it comes to the lives of their people, they want the best and most reliable knowledge out there, and they invest heavily in science. So that's what we got to keep in mind. Spirituality and science are not mutually exclusive. From an African perspective, we understand that spirit, the unseen, is the reality that undergirds and influences the physical. We have to. This is one of the reasons why I do a lot of these lectures, and I usually upset a lot of folks because, you know, people have a misunderstanding about African spirituality. Spirituality has to do with the physical world. And I might have to do a series, and this is something that I'm going to discuss in some future. And so I have, you know, my cameras, and I'm going to be calling on the community to support, because I'm going to be doing a documentary film based on the information in this text. So this has always been the plan, that I show the relationship between Bantu cultures, Bantu philosophy, etc. in ancient Egypt. And then I'm going to do a film on it. So we're going to deal with China into the philosophy and religion and things, and then we're going to document it in the film, and to show folks, because, you know, this book here is 560 something pages, 8.5 by 11. It's thick. So I don't expect the community to read all of this. You know, you have to have a certain mind, and, you know, to even appreciate, you know, a text like this. So, but a lot of our people will respond to the visuals, and so that's what's going to happen. And I want to show, because, you know, one of is subtitled "China into Religion and Philosophy," and, you know, I've been interested in religion and philosophy and mythology since my early teens, and so I've been researching this since the early and mid 90s. And so this is a partial accumulation of this 20 plus years of research in this area. And one of the things that, you know, I've come to realize is that a lot of us really don't understand, you know, what religion and philosophy is coming from the African continent. And then they also don't understand what science is. And so I had to address those both in the text, so we know where in certain aspects there's some overlap, but where they are totally different. And so, for example, and I did a whole show on this on my channel that you can find, and I cited source after source after source when it comes to African spirituality. Knowledge through spirituality and religion is not done through testing. It is done through revelation. Like, they get whether it's, you know, possession or in a dream or something to this nature, or revealed text in the case of like Islam and Christianity, for example. It is not done by experimentation and things of that nature. So this is what distinguishes the two. And so in science, they could care less where you got the inspiration from. Can you prove it? And then can other people prove it? Et cetera, et cetera. In religion and spirituality, you know, you can get the revelation, and the people will follow it because they believe it's a direct, you know, a direct sending of information from spirit or God itself. And so usually the prestige of the individual plays an important role on what becomes canon or not in a spiritual or religious tradition. Ideally, that is not the case in science. Not saying it doesn't happen, because it does. That's how a lot of misinformation has been passed on in science, because the person who came up with the idea or argument is so well respected in the scientific circles. But the process of science will always weed that stuff out. And so this is why people have a hard time understanding why, for example, like why I can go against an argument made by Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop. a lot of us still have religious thinking because Sheikh Anta is very revered in our community. What he says just goes. But as a scientist, I can't do what he says just goes. I have to investigate it. And as a scientist, Sheikh Anta understood that and told us that's what we should do. Sheikh Anta told us not to believe anything that he says, but to investigate and to prove him right or wrong. These are his words coming out of his mouth. And so because a lot of us aren't scientifically literate, we don't involve ourselves in the sciences, we don't understand that process. And so a lot of people take it personally if you go against an argument made by someone who is of renown. And that's what we want to avoid with religion and mythology and stuff of that nature. It has its place. It serves a different role in society than does science. Now, certain scientific outcomes may be inspired itself by religion, philosophy, and the underlying creative culture and even spirituality. So that's what I just read coming from the ancient Egyptians. It is their spirituality, their investigation into the deities that inspired, that motivated them to investigate nature and where they made their discoveries. So it's as you said, they're not mutually exclusive. However, there's a firm difference between religion, spirituality, and science itself. So I have to keep that in mind. Well, we have to keep that in mind. Do you think to produce more scientists from where our culture is today, African people has to explore more in African human nature to create a social technology, therefore a culture that produce more scientists? It all starts with the value system. If your culture values scientists, then you would ideally, again, create and muster the resources to help produce more scientists. That's just all it is. It's in the value system. And so the culture itself has to recognize that the scientists add value to the culture. And it strengthens the culture and ultimately, of course, the population, because the culture is the mental framework and behaviors and whatnot. But there, of course, all of that is attached to actual human beings. So, the scientist adds value, it adds prestige, to the culture and things. And that's what we have to keep in mind. And so it is, once we understand the role of value in adding value to what it is that we do, then we'll understand, because whatever we got to start thinking in terms of long term. So if your culture wants to exist and sustain itself, the population wants to exist and sustain itself for generations to come, it has to put things in place in the present moment so that your great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren will thrive in the future. So everything that we're doing now is not only for our personal benefit while we're living. We're doing what we're doing so that we can preserve our people into the future. And so there's certain types of people, there's certain types of ideas, there's certain types of values and behaviors that must exist presently in order for the people and the culture to exist perpetually into the future. And there's certain things that that are harmful, that are damaging to the population and the culture, that will ensure that we don't exist into the future. And so that's stuff like, bad character, because bad character fosters mistrust in the community. And if you don't have trust in the community, you can't build an economy, because we'll be looking to everybody else to solve our problems. And so if you don't think of your people as capable of solving problems, then all those other folks who have scientists and who have intellectuals and are doing things in their community, we'll only look to them to be our saviors instead of looking to us. We are the ones we've been waiting on. And so in order to do that, we have to create our own educational systems. We have to develop our own teachers. We have to create our own curriculum texts that we teach the folks. We have to have our own rites of passage. We have to have our own everything. We have to have our own stores and technologies and stuff like this. This is the only way that we are going to be able to build. And matter of fact, in Dr. Amos Wilson's book, the 3rd chapter is culture as the basis of power. And so is the culture is the foundation for power. And so having a populace full of critical thinkers and scientists informs you how to utilize that power to the best of the ability. Now that, has to be in conjunction, of course, with a strong anthropological and ethical, education and things of this nature. It's not isolated. With a culture is a system. There's many different components that are working together for the health of the system. And so it's never, we can't think myopically, like it's just only one thing, and this one thing is going to help solve everything. No, it's this and this and this over here and this over here working together, having an interrelationship with each other. Because what's important is the system, the whole, and that's what we got to keep in mind. So, do our culture values at present value science? If we would go by if we was to go by what I see in the conscious community, no. Our culture values conspiracy theories and mysteries and religious concepts over everything. And it's a shame, that people will put their health in danger, because they don't value science and scientists. And that's the problem. Again, we have a long way to go, because think about it like this. The vast majority of our communities, and I'm just going to say strictly speaking, African Americans in the United States, they're primarily Christians and Muslims. Science is a danger to those doctrines because science gives you a way to verify and or falsify claims made in those particular doctrines. And because of that, those individuals have a love-hate relationship with science. So they'll respect science as long as we're dealing with, some medicines here and stuff to that nature. But once it starts proving the Bible false and the Quran false, then we got problems. And so then they want to, go against everything. Matter of fact, the Bible itself is anti-science. It's an anti-science book. And you know this from the beginning of the book. And so Adam and Eve cursed everybody else for all generations because they ate from the tree of what? Of knowledge and evil. And so, remember, these are nomadic sheep herders who created these myths and stories in terms of the Bible. And so as a result of that, they had a disdain for those scientific communities, which created large structures and temples and farming and stuff to that nature, because those scientific communities are the ones who, in their minds, took all the good land. And it killed their lifestyle. So all throughout the text, when you really look at the word shaitan and all of this other kind of stuff, you'll find, matter of fact, I think I need to remind myself, I'll do a presentation strictly on that. And I'll show you in the biblical text how they are anti-science and why this poses a problem. This is why you have all of these folks trying to constantly go into Congress and get evolution taken out of the science books, because it infringes on their conceptualization of how life came to be, on the earth. And there's a lot of African folks who are anti-evolution as well. And so those of y'all who know with the Amaran Squad, we've been fighting that for years. But we have to be a bit more diligent, on this. But as far as I'm concerned, no, because matter of fact, most of when I was taking my higher level courses in college, it wasn't too many black folks. All black folks like to do when we get to college is take courses in business, courses, international studies, history, psychology, anthropology, stuff like that, culture anthropology and stuff like that, sociology. We like more human things. But those courses that require math and physics and chemistry, we don't like taking those courses. And this is part of the reason why like less than 1% of PhDs are black folks in the sciences, of science degrees. This is one of the reasons why I promote this. And we have, Black Science Month in October. And so we're trying to get it to where black folks value science and value scientists and will encourage their children to become scientists, engineers, mathematicians, electricians, electrical engineers, and astronomers and stuff to this nature. We are so behind in those fields because we don't value science and being scientists in a large scale. A lot of us want to be preachers, politicians, entertainers, nothing wrong with that. But we need to increase our scientific output. And I know I was rambling. Says Amber Evans says, I think it's evident that American culture in general doesn't value science, and definitely not black culture. Agree. But then again, remember, most folks are Christian or Muslims. And so, this plays a role. I can't quantify how big a role. I know it plays a role in general. But let me see. Do you think that mythological belief in science can exist? They already do exist. How do we know wouldn't be adopting the West and worshiping at the altar of science and technology? I don't even know how to even read that sentence. So maybe you could reword it and we can revisit it. What is this? African Americans have to subsist within the greater context of the white American framework, which does not favor the flourishing of black advancement scientifically, intellectually, and generally. To an extent, I agree, but in the final analysis, it shouldn't matter. It is what it is. This is the life that we live, and if we're going to thrive, we have to overcome it. And so I believe that African people have what it takes to tower over any of the 1001 challenges of life. So that's I'm not scared of that. We've been overcoming obstacles since we dropped here in 1619, and so we got to lobby for it in our own communities. Exactly. Shesmu Patah says Islam respects science until you start talking about ideas that go against fundamental tenets of Islam. That's just the nature of religion. Doesn't matter if it's Islam or Christianity. African spirituality is the same way. Once you start questioning certain tenets of the spiritual tradition there, they get just as defensive and dismissive as Christians or Muslims. So it's just, again, this is how you can tell the test in terms of what is science or not. People try to argue that certain religion is science or has some science. No, it doesn't. If all of your information comes from revelation, it's not science. It is what it is. Let me see. Where is the institutional driving force in African American social culture at present that needs to be scaled up to produce more scientists? I can't say that there really is one outside of just, if you like at a HBCU, for example, that may have, courses and stuff that you can take. But, the only institutions I can probably, in terms of organizations, are the ones that are kind of for that particular field. So like you have like a Black engineers society or organization. The same thing with astronomers. Like everyone has their black, group, just like how you have a black caucus when people get into politics. We always create these groups, and they're always fighting for or trying to encourage more of us to get into whatever fields that they belong to. But there's no large scale institute that I'm aware of that just promotes science in general in that way, and that creates, scientists that is strictly. And I would go further, because it's not just black. It can't just be black folks. It has, in my opinion, it has to be an African-centered, an Afrocentric institute that deals with science in a real way, because it is the Afrocentricity that would shape the thoughts to be able to utilize that science in the defense and in the benefit of African people. And so we have a lot of people who get into the sciences, but because the thinking, the value system is European, is Eurocentric, they don't utilize that information and skill set for the benefit of Black people and African people in general. So that's not what we want. We want to create institutions that are African-centered, that Afrocentricity is the guiding framework, and create these particular sciences. That's my aim. So Diop was a Muslim, sure was, and Marcus Garvey was a Christian. Richard White, I'm gonna call him, man. So that's how I'm moving forward. Indeed, there has to be. Indeed, there's nuances in that. So it's just pretty much comments. I didn't see too many questions. But before I go, I want to kind of inform everyone about 2 new shows. So this past weekend, or this last Friday, I had a show. The first one is called The Devil's Advocate. And the first question that we asked is, being a billionaire morally wrong? So we're going to have another show this Friday. And the question is based off of the statement, well, she wasn't with me in the gym shooting 3 free throws or whatnot. Should a spouse get half, in a divorce or whatnot? So we're going to have an open panel discussion, about that. And I'm going to play the devil's advocate. So this will be a new segment, of conversation on this channel. And this entity is called the Devil's Advocate. And then another one is called House Insecure. And so I will be, gathering a few of my, frat brothers on occasion, and we're going to tackle a number of different topics. And so it's called House Insecure. And all of that we explain. The first episode is tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern time, 8 p.m. Central. And, it's going to be a fun and interesting show. So we're going to, spice up the channel a little bit with some different conversations. And I'll still be having, my presentations and other interviews. We're securing some interviews and trying to schedule them with some African scholars from South Africa. We have brother Dr. Sharmarka Keita, who's coming back, and we're going to deal with the issue of race from a biological standpoint and the merits of that concept, in science, and a whole host of other things. So I hope you are able to join us, and please continue to support, both with your presence and financially, the program, this particular program, so we can grow and expand and do some other things. So I really want to, start utilizing my camera, and, when we get out of this COVID, and start putting some more put together shows, like some mini documentaries and things, so that we can expand the conversation and do it in a real way. So thank you all for your support, your questions, and everything. And so with that, I'm going to end this conversation, and I will see y'all on tomorrow night, where we'll be discussing a whole slew of things. We might even talk about Sister Kamala being, running for VP and all of that other kind of stuff. So expand the conversation. And so don't forget to like and subscribe this channel. Thank you all. Look forward to hearing from you in the future. And with that said, I am out.